going to be a powerful and explosive study. So, as usual, call someone.
God will not reject anyone.
Jesus wants to make you a new person today.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Whispering Hope Daily Sabbath School Lesson Review. And here to do our lesson review with us this morning is Pastor Orville Joseph. We continue to look at the topic, waging love. And we have been learning a lot this week. And today continues with another interesting topic. But before we go into our lesson review for today, we're going to bow our heads. I'm going to pray and the pastor will read the memory text for this week. Let us bow our heads. Eternal God and our Father, we are truly grateful for your leading thus far. We pray, God, as we open your words again this morning, that you will send your spirit to give us the enlightenment in you as we go into your words. Bless us, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Our memory verse for this week comes from Isaiah 58 and verse 10. It says, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. That's Isaiah 58 and verse 10, the New King James Version.
Our topic for today, a time for us. So as we look at the topic, today is going to be very interesting. We have been touching a few topics earlier this week about God's thoughts and ways are higher than our ways, fast friends, etc. So we have been looking into the lesson, and again, this week it takes another twist. And so we're saying, a time for us. What is that saying to us this morning?
Well, a time for us is an allusion to the fact that God has set out a time in his time frame, a section that he, the divine being, would spend with us or would desire for us to bask in his presence, not only to bask in his presence, but to think as he thinks with regards to our concern for others. One of the very interesting things that we see emerging with the coming of the Messiah was his desire for us to better understand this time that God has carved out for us. And one of the very first things he did to challenge the status quo and to challenge the thinking of the believers then about who God is and how he relates to people was coming into Jerusalem. You remember the story, coming by the pool of Bethesda, meeting the crippled man there and asking him to take up his bed and walk. One of his very first Sabbath miracle, a clear indication that he wanted to send a message that the Sabbath time reserved for God and his people was a time when we ought to think about others rather than ourselves. And so a time for us is alluding to a fact about a time for us with God, or a time for us allowing others to experience God. That is what it is all about.
Pastor, as we look into the text for today, Isaiah 58, 13 and 14, it says, if thou turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high hills of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord have spoken it. Pastor, why does Isaiah discuss the Sabbath in Isaiah 58, 13 and 14? What connection does that have with the Day of Atonement? in the setting of the earlier verses. Now, we'll be discussing this week. So I'm going to ask another question also with that question. What does it have to do with waging love?
If we follow on from last week, when we talked about God doing the unthinkable, and the unthinkable was allowing his son, Jesus Christ, to come to die so that men and women can be redeemed. The whole concept of redemption is cradled in that thought that God redeems his people. Now, redemption comes when the day of atonement is made real. And so Jesus, the Lamb, brought us into the presence of the atonement when he died on Calvary, because he, as Paul says, became the Lamb, or as Isaiah declared, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, or the Lamb brought to the slaughter in 53 of Isaiah. So clearly, we are in the thinking of God's redemptive act as it is in the Day of Atonement. Hence the critical thing about the Sabbath, because the Day of Atonement was always a Sabbath day. Okay? And if you go back to Leviticus 23, you will clearly understand that the Day of Atonement was to be treated as the regular weekly Sabbath. In other words, it ought to be hallowed, it ought to be kept holy. You're not supposed to do your own work. You ought to remember your Creator. You focus on God. You ought to put self aside. You ought to keep God as focus. You have to keep your neighbors, your friends, your loved one as focus as well. You have got to make sure that you observe it from sundown until sundown, so that the whole day, in terms of the thinking of atonement, was to be treated with the same intensity, the same hallowedness as the weekly Sabbath. And so here Isaiah brings that thought of the Sabbath in the context of the atonement. And here's the idea that when atonement comes, in a time that brings us at peace with ourselves and with God, it is a time that allows us to forget about the past and all of our transgressions and failures and disappointment. And it's a time now to reflect on God, and also to reflect on what God can do for others. And so that is why I think Isaiah has brought the Sabbath in at this time, to remind us that the Day of Atonement, the day of redemption, the day of finally gaining the victory over sin, death, hell, the grave, that day is here. And that day ought to be thought of in light of God's redemptive power for others, and also of our solitude, our reflection, our communion, our worship of God has to become the main focus of our life from this point forward.
I'm going to ask you a question perhaps you didn't expect me to bring to you this morning, but after watching Pastor Hall's presentation, and I hope it's a presentation I'll be able to upload after this lesson this morning, is the fact is there may be persons watching and viewing us saying the Day of Atonement was a Sabbath day, but it wasn't on the seventh day of the week. So therefore, we must be able to have a Sabbath other than the seventh day, which is Saturday. Did you get that question?
Yes, I got that question very clearly. The Bible says at the very beginning, the very seventh day of the first week of God's creation, God set that day aside and says that he hallowed it, he sanctified it. In other words, I am making it holy, I am setting it apart. It is a day for all. Jesus came and he says that the Sabbath was made for man, right? And not man for the Sabbath. In other words, God made the Sabbath for man to bask in, for man to experience. There is the weekly Sabbath that is established by God. However, God also used the Sabbath theme and Sabbath context throughout the Old Testament to highlight significant moments in the life of the people of God as they journeyed with him. And one such time is the Day of Atonement. Now, you remember also that the Old Testament talks of the year of Jubilee, talks about the 7-year Sabbath and time when the slaves ought to be or can be redeemed and debt settled, etc. So that the Sabbath comes as a special time within the life of God's people. So that if you are saying that every day or any day can be the Sabbath, yes, any day can be a special day, but that does not destroy the seventh day that God has established as the weekly Sabbath. Okay? So that when we come to the Day of Atonement, God wanted the Day of Atonement to be a very special and extremely special day for his people, because on that day they acknowledge that Jesus Christ, who will come as the Messiah, will die, that it will put an end to the penalty that they would have had to experience as individuals of eternal death and damnation, and that should be celebrated as a Sabbath, as a time for and with God.
Pastor, so we're looking at the next question in the lesson this morning, which says, Isaiah 58:13, what kind of day is the Sabbath supposed to be? How can we make our Sabbath experience like the one depicted here? Also, when you think about what the Sabbath represents, why should it be the kind of day described in this text? And I find that for the last 3 weeks, Pastor, you've been getting some tough topics to discuss. I know a lot of questions rise, and I'm sure you're going to get some more questions after we discuss this lesson today.
Again, Isaiah 58:13 seeks to help us to understand that the Sabbath ought to be a moment of joy, of celebration, of lightheartedness, of a deep sense of assurance and fulfillment and peace. That's what the Sabbath ought to be about. And Isaiah can allude to the fact that, hey, listen, if you forget about the things that labor you through the week, if you forget about the things that frustrate your experience, if you forget about the pain and the anguish you endure, if you forget about the work that you were doing during the week and you don't put them on your mind, and you think about positive things on the Sabbath, if you get excited about helping others, if you get excited about the joy of seeing others rejoicing in the Lord, if you get excited about spending time with God, praying and reading and sitting down with loved ones and in a good Christian way, celebrate those moments, then you can understand that with all the stress and strain and anxiety of the past week gone, then the Sabbath remains where your heart is open for joy in the Lord. That is what the Sabbath is supposed to be. So when we talk about not doing work on the Sabbath, we're not merely talking about people not using the opportunity to make money, and we're talking about the person freeing themselves from the burden that they have been carrying all week, thinking about the job, thinking about the labor, thinking about the tiredness, thinking about the pain of exercising their body in that work. But they can transform and transcend that experience into an experience that brings them joy, that brings them smile. Yes, at the end of every work day, you look forward for the rest that comes in the evening. You look forward of getting away from that job site and getting home. So it is, the Lord says, when you come to the Sabbath, just let all that stay behind. Don't think about it. Just let it go, and you just don't have the next 12 hours or whatever it is that you're going to be away from your work. You have 24 hours that you can spend in a time of great joy and peace and satisfaction. That's what Isaiah 13 says. Look for moments when you can bring joy to others, because when you bring joy to others, you bring joy to yourself. And I believe, and I alluded to that miracle when Jesus wrought at Bethesda. But also remember in Mark, I think it is chapter 3, also in Mark chapter 2, I think 2 and 3, there are two stories. And Jesus talks about the whole Sabbath experience. One of them, he's healing a man with a shriveled hand. And I just talked about work, because many commentators believe that that man was a mason, by the way, who was plying his trade and got his hand injured, and as a result was unable to go out to work anymore. Jesus comes into the temple on the Sabbath day, saw him there, and the text says that the members inside the church that Sabbath saw Jesus, they saw the man with the crippled hand, and they knew already that Jesus was going to do something about him, because the Sabbath was not a limitation on him to do good. The Sabbath was not a limitation on him to allow somebody to experience wellness. The Sabbath was not a limitation on him to allow somebody to have the ability after that to rejoice and to be able to provide for their family. So when they saw him, they says, yes, let's see what he's going to do. And a man with a withered hand, the Sabbath, what is going to be his choice? Jesus chose rather to bring joy to that young man, rather than to follow the traditional dictates that people had about the Sabbath. And so it is, Isaiah 58:13 is saying to us, let go of those things that allow the Sabbath to be a drag on your life, to be a sad, sorry experience, and let them go and allow the Sabbath to be a time of delight, a time of enjoyment, in terms of enjoyment in the Lord, enjoyment in your service to others, enjoyment in terms of your thoughts. And that is what Isaiah is saying. If you allow the Sabbath to be that, you'll experience a difference, that you will say, wow, I didn't know the Sabbath could be this refreshing and enjoyable.
So, Pastor, I hear you saying that it's okay to take a walk up to Dunning's Dam with your family. It's okay to go down by Fry's Beach and have some lunch, not to go and bathe. I hear you saying it's okay to go to Mount St. John's Medical Center to see the sick, or to go through the community and visit the sick. But then if you're doing that, how is it about like flicking on your TV and you're not getting excited and maybe watching a game of cricket? You tell me, what do we do? Some persons are looking for the practical answers. Can I watch a game of cricket and basketball, recap? Can I watch secular things on the TV, or just maybe SLC and North Caribbean and 3ABN? Those things are, so I hear people asking all those questions.
Well, I mean, all of them could be the one and the same. I'm serious about this. The reason why we turn on Hope Channel, 3ABN, SLC Channel, is that the same as watching cricket? And I will say to you, it could be that I am turning on to see a preacher merely for my excitement, merely for my personal satisfaction, just as how I would have done for a game of cricket. The Sabbath is supposed to be a time when we focus on God, one, a time when we are selfless and we think about others, a time when we look for opportunity to be a blessing and a joy to others. And so whatever our experience, you see, because I don't like to put on the labels, because when you put on the labels, you get distracted. You remember a few years ago, I always like to go back to this. A few years ago, it was wrong to watch TV, or a few years ago, it was wrong to listen to the radio. But today, because there are religious things that are happening, religious services that are taking place, then we say it's all right. What you don't want to do is to get locked down in labels and say, okay, it's all right to watch cricket, or it's not all right to watch cricket, but it's all right to watch another evangelist because I like how he preaches And when he preaches, I get excited. You know, those are things that it is a reason why you do what you do that affects your Sabbath experience. And that is that's the point I want to make. It's a reason why you do what you do that affects your Sabbath experience, and not necessarily, I think that's the point that Jesus was making, that, hey, listen, it is not what you do, but why you do it. Why you do it that makes the Sabbath, that makes your act a desecration of the Sabbath as versus a joy and a delight. And so in today's lesson, we learn some principles that so far as the Sabbath is concerned, and especially as is emphasized in Isaiah 58, we ought to focus on self-denial, we ought to focus on social kindness, and we ought to focus on our experience with God. Because when we do that, we are in sync with what is God's expectation of holiness so far as the Sabbath is concerned. My encouragement to individuals is not, a walk to Dunning's Dam could very well be unsabbatical if you are not using that experience to build your relationship with God, to build your relationship with your family, to build your relationship with your community. Okay? You can take a walk to Dunning's Dam because you see the sacred time of the Sabbath as an opportunity to fulfill the Elijah message of turning the heart of your children, your biological children or your adopted children, towards you and towards God. That's you building your family relationship. You can take a walk towards Dam if you have a group of young people or a group of individuals who you want to turn and give focus to God. And that experience will give you an opportunity, right? An opportunity to do so. In that way, then your experience is one that brings delight on the Sabbath. But if I am just simply going because I want to be on an excursion, I just want to do something that is a personal fulfillment and a personal desire, that it makes the difference. Again, it is not what you do, but why you do it that challenges the experience that you have on Sabbath. Sabbath was designed to be a time for God's people to spend with Him, and for time for God's people to allow others to experience the fullness of God in His beauty and in His glory. Having said that as well, it is a danger for us, those who focus on the Sabbath, to think that things that we could have gotten done on Friday or on Thursday or on Wednesday can be left until Sabbath because it can be perceived as being sabbatical. You understand? Visiting the hospital is good, but if I had the time to do it on Wednesday, but I didn't do it on Wednesday because I know it's not going to be perceived as being something that I am doing wrong on Sabbath, then I might be in a little pickle, right? So we have to be able to have our minds tuned to God in a way that says that when we do things on Sabbath, it is not just because we have offloaded everything else to the Sabbath. Because if people see us doing them on the Sabbath, they will not think that we're breaking the Sabbath, right? And so that we have to be very careful of.
Well, I think I've just gotten you into some trouble, but you'll have to find your way out of that trouble. The lesson looks at the question. There's a question there, not one of the highlighted questions, but there's a question in the third section which says, and you were just addressing them, so I didn't have to take you to them. The themes, the three main themes in the lesson this week, which is self-denial, social kindness, and the Sabbath. It says, what are the connection between them? What are the connection between the three? You alluded to them, but what is the connection between them?
As the lesson says, there is this connection because it prioritizes and recognizes our dependence on God. That's the first point it makes. And then the second point is that in doing all three, we pursue holiness and we perform acts as Christ, and also we hallow the Sabbath by not laboring on the Sabbath. But so here's where we go. When we talk about the second idea in terms of the connection, interestingly, the pursuit of holiness is linked to our ability to care for others. Now, if you go back to Leviticus 19 and verse 2, it says, "Be you holy even as I am holy." But then it goes, that very chapter goes to a list of things. And one of the things that the children of Israel were called to do is that whenever they had a field and they were reaping from the field, they were to leave back something in the field so that those who were poor can come and glean in the field. So that the whole context of that chapter says that part of us being holy like Christ is holy is also taking care of the poor, of the fatherless, the widow, those who are unfortunate, those who find themselves in difficult circumstances. Many times when people quote this text about being holy as God is holy, we talk about refraining from doing things, doing this and not doing that, and being pious, that people pursue piety in order to be holy. But here the passage is suggesting that what we do for the poor, for the downtrodden, that is what makes a difference and attributes holiness to us. And that is important. The second point that is made is that is a text we were using a lot last week in the text. That is Philippians 2 and verse 8, when it talks about Jesus humbling himself and became obedient even unto death. So that when we humble ourselves and treat others as Christ would treat them, and live for others rather than living for ourselves, that is the connection of the Sabbath theme to our experience. That's the connection between who we ought to be as Christians and what the experience of the Sabbath ought to be like. And then it comes to the point that there is a reminder that the Sabbath is a reminder that we are God's creation. So there's a focus on God, there's a focus on others, and it is by our experience in terms of how we treat others that gives us our connection with Christ.
We're winding down, and so we get to the highlighted section, and it says, look at these other ties between the themes of self-denial, social kindness, and the Sabbath. As depicted in Isaiah 58, Sabbath freedom from weekly toil is kind to people because it lets them be refreshed. Jesus showed that kind acts are appreciated on the Sabbath, and then true Sabbath keeping brings joy, as does helping others. Then the question comes in the end, it says, what must change in our life in order to experience these blessings yourself? And I was wondering all along, because at the introduction, I knew I saw something about humbling yourself in the lesson this week. It didn't come out as one of the three themes, but I had it as a theme too as I go through the lesson, and I heard you mentioning it. So as you address that, you link humility with it, going out and doing the pitch for this morning's lesson.
Must you change in your life in order to experience these blessings yourself? And the song comes to me, others, Lord, yes, others, let this my motto be, help me to think of others, and I will think like thee or be like thee. So again, I alluded to several of these texts earlier on. The first one in Mark 2 and verse 27. The second one in Mark 3 verses 1 to 5. That's the man with the withered hand. John 5, 1 to 17. That's the pool of Bethesda. The whole idea, what God expects of us is for us to be like Christ, be like God to somebody. That is always having the spirit of compassion and concern, a desire to see others experience the fullness of life. Many times we think that because we have achieved and been successful, we talked about this about 3 weeks back, where we talked about sometimes we think that we achieve success that is all on our own steam. That those kind of thinking is what stifles our relationship with God, that stifles the joy that comes as a result of the Sabbath. It is a thinking that, hey, listen, what I have, I can share with others. Not to the point of pauperizing myself, because I always want to be a source, a fountain from which flows the goodness of God, a fountain where others can experience. And one of the things that we ought to think about as well is bringing people to the point where they themselves can be a fountain to others as well. I think one of the things that people are concerned about in today's day is whether or not there will be a constant flowing stream of helping people over and over and over and over again without a definite end. But one of the things that we can do in terms of helping people is to be able to help them to appreciate that even though they are recipients now, they need to be able to put themselves in a position where they can be givers as well. Because the joy comes in giving, not in receiving. It's a concept that Jesus taught, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. So people who are receiving now might be receiving because they are in need, but they need to know that they need to put them in order to experience real joy, real deliverance, real freedom. They need to put themselves in a position where they are not receivers, but they are givers. And that is the big challenge. And so today, as we close the lesson, there are a few things that we need to remember. One, that God loves us to the point where he wants us to experience joy, blessings, peace, tranquility. And that is why he has carved out a time for us. The second point I want you to remember is that the Sabbath gives us the opportunity to be like God to others. In that we can be compassionate, we can be forgiving, we can relieve them of their suffering, we can ease their pain, we can bring joy to them, we can allow their families to experience that experience. Thirdly, the Sabbath brings freedom and deliverance to us, in knowing that we do not have to carry the yoke, the burden, the frustration, the pain, the anguish, the disappointments of past weeks and past days beyond this point, that we can let them go come the dawn of the Sabbath and enter into a period of peace, solitude, rejoicing, joy, delight, whatever you call it, during those times with God. Finally, what our experience is, we can help others to have that experience, so that it is not an ongoing cycle, but that just as how we experience the joy of the Sabbath, somebody else can come into a relationship with God that allows them to experience the joy of the Sabbath and perpetuate a cycle where every time we encounter somebody who needs help, God's help, our help, that we transform them into an individual who can provide help to others, so that it can be perpetuated in that way. And in that way, the Sabbath becomes a delight for all of God's people. Don't take it as a simple thing. Don't take it as a trivial thing. God carved out the Sabbath not merely for us to restrain from work, but for us to enrich our own lives and the lives of others. May God help us as we experience the Sabbath every week, and as we look forward in anticipation to experiencing the Sabbath through eternity.
So I want to thank Pastor Joseph for bringing our lesson to us today. And I do hope it was clear to you. But if you have any questions, you just drop it in the YouTube link this morning. drop it there, and then we can revisit it on Sabbath. So as you go out today, remember, even if you are already vaccinated, wear your mask, exercise your physical and social distancing, and always sanitize. Have a wonderful day. God bless you.